çok fazla uzun yazmışsınız başlığı. O yüzden kabul etmedi. Şimdi oldu ama. Şimdi YouTube'a giriyoruz. Canlı yayın başlamak üzere. Evet. Şimdi YouTube açılıyor. Okay. Okay. The YouTube channel has started now. Ya başladı. YouTube açılıyor. Okay. Now YouTube is ready. Linki vereyim mi? Ne yapayım arkadaşlar? Biri alıyor mu linki?
Linki versen yeterli hocam. Gerisini halledeceğiz. Kim verebilirse.
Ya linki de bana verdirin. Onu da al. Nereye atayım linki?
Hocamı bilsem ben size o işi bırakmam ama.
Nereye atacağım bunu? WhatsApp'ı kapatmıştım ben ya. Bir saniye.
Atın buradan chatten alayım hocam.
Chatten alabilir misin? Alamazsın ki. Dur bir.
Alırım.
Abi alıyorum. Tamam sakin. Ben de.
Okay. Ayağım o zaman başlatıyorum ben. Interpretation'ı başlatıyorum. Okay. Uğur, I put the link. Okay? Engelse işimin WhatsApp'ından alabilirsin. Okay. Now, I am starting the interpretation. Çağrı, can you start recording?
Nope.
Çağrı.
Tamam, şu an uygun görünüyorum.
Tamam. Şimdi YouTube'daki kanalımızdaki arkadaşlarımıza küçük bir duyurumuz var. Merhabalar arkadaşlar. Zoom'dan yayınımızı yapıyoruz ama maalesef orijinal canlı yayını İngilizce olarak takip edeceksiniz. Çünkü simultane yaptığımız zaman en azından bir simultane yayının nasıl Türkçe'ye dönüşeceğini, yani simultane tercüman arkadaşlarımızın seslerini duyamadık. Önce bu duyuruyu yapmak istiyorum. O yüzden herkesten özür diliyoruz böyle bir şey olduğu için. Ama iyi bir haberimiz var. Kaydı da yapıyoruz. O kaydı daha sonra yayınlayacağız. O kaydı da Türkçesini de vermiş olacağız arkadaşlar. Hiç merak etmeyin. Şu an YouTube'da canlı yayındayız. Programımız bir saat gecikmeli başladı. Saat farkı sorunu nedeniyle. Çağrı bir şey mi sordun?
Şeyi açtın mı interpretation'ı?
Henüz açmadım. Şimdi açacağım.
Haber var. Kayda o zaman gireyim abi.
Okay. Şimdi interpretation'ı başlatmak üzereyeceğim. Arkadaşlar şimdi ben size diyeceğim ki more düğmesine basın diyeceğim.
Şunu da duyuralım mı Engin buradan?
Efendim?
Halen webinar için kayıtlarımız açık. Evet. Şu anda da girip kayıt yapıp Zoom'dan Türkçe dinlemeniz mümkün. Sonradanını beklemek zorunda değilsiniz.
Aynen. Bunu, öğrenci arkadaşlarımız da buradalar mı hala? ED200 öğrencisi arkadaşlarımız. Burada mısınız? YouTube kanalımızdaki canlı yayın yorumuna yazın, olur mu? Engel seçime mutlaka webinarı falan yapıştırın linkini, olur mu biraz sonra? Bu bilgileri verin, olur mu çocuklar? Burada mısınız? Evet. Now let's start. I started interpretation. Arkadaşlar lütfen more düğmesine basın. Size bir 2 dakika verelim. Herkes more düğmesine basarak oradan geçsinler mümkünse.
Faruk buradayım. Hazırsa şey yaparsın.
Sen kaydı başlatabilirsin Çağrı'cığım. Arkadaşlar more'a basıp geçebilirsiniz ya da interpretation'dan geçebilirsiniz. Ben geçmeme gerek yok bu durumda galiba. Ben buradan devam ediyorum arkadaşlar.
Tamam, Faruk buradaysa ben Turkish'teyim şu an.
Faruk konuş. Duyuyor musun?
Beni interpretation'a alacağım.
Sen mi Turkish'tesin?
Şebnem konuşuyor, evet. Şebnem ya duyuyor mu sen?
Şebnem duyuluyor. Şebnem konuşurken sen de duyuluyorsun ama.
Tamam.
Ama şöyle, ben Zoom'dayım direkt. Ben bir kanal değiştirmedim hocam. Beni oraya almanız lazım sanırım.
Interpretation'daydı ama sen interpreter'dın.
Evet. Yani ben oradan, o linkten katıldım zaten.
Faruk bir konuşur mu?
Tamam. Şebnem Turkish'te abi. Faruk English'te galiba. Onu duyamıyoruz.
Tamam. Ben doğru yerdeyim o zaman.
Greg'den bir onay alabilir mi Faruk duyduğuna dair? Eğer Greg seçtiyse şeyi.
Ama bir dakika. Arkadaşlar siz Şebnem'i mi duyuyorsunuz? Kimi duyuyorsunuz şu an? Arkadaşlar kimi duyuyorlar?
Kanalı Şebnem'i duyuyor.
Greg, can you hear me?
Yes.
Ben de Greg'i duyuyorum.
Ama biz seni bu kadar duymamamız lazım Şebnem. Sorun o.
Evet.
Yani şöyle bir şey var.
Hayır, Şebnem sana bir uyarı gelecek. Turkish'i seçmen lazım. Telefonuna bakar mısın bilgisayarına? Orada Turkish, sen şu an gitmen lazım. Yani uyarı gelmeli sana.
Interpretation'a tıklıyorum.
Evet. Turkish'i seç.
Hocam off ve English var sadece. English selected
Yani
diyor hem de.
Faruk bir konuşur mu?
Interpretation'a tıklıyorum.
Evet. O nereden geliyor ya? Bir dakika.
Kayıttan.
Faruk konuşuyor mu? Faruk'u duyan var mı arkadaşlar? Biri böyle söyleyebilir mi Faruk duyuyorsa? Faruk neredesin?
English selected diyor.
Biz şeyi duymuyoruz Faruk Engin abi.
Faruk bir konuşuyor mu?
Interpretation'a tıklıyorum.
Evet.
Ben şu an
Ben kendi sesimi kimden duyuyorum? YouTube
duydum.
yayını kapatsın bir arkadaşlar. Orada onu duyuyorum. Duyan var mı arkadaşlar? Biri böyle söyleyebilir mi Faruk duyuyorsa? Faruk neredesin?
English selected.
Ya kim?
Faruk Engin abi.
Sen İngilizce
birinin-
kısmındasın Faruk. O yüzden senin sesin duyuluyor.
Bende de off ve English'ten başka seçenek yok.
Site üzerindeki yayın tamamdır arkadaşlar. Sitede yayın
Şey
başladı.
güncelleme mordan çıkıp yapsa sesim geliyor mudur bilmiyorum ama.
Bir end yapıp
Şeyden-
tekrar edelim. Tamam bir dakika. Evet end yapalım. Greg, sorry for the we try to adjust the interpretation. Okay, please. Sorry. Okay. And okay.
Benim sesimi duyan oldu mu bu arada?
Duyan oldu mu
Bayağı
şimdi?
bir-
Hepimiz duyduk.
Hani moru
Evet.
close. Ben çünkü Türkçeden girdim. Ama ben de buradan sesim nasıl geliyor mu anlamadım.
İptal etti Engin abi şu an şeyi.
Tamam.
Manage language interpretation. Şebnem,
Evet hocam.
sen şu an görünmüyorsun sanki. Niye? Not join. Sen bir çıkıp giriş mi yaptın falan? Tekrar girer misin?
Hiç çıkmadım ki.
Demin vardın ama.
Bakayım.
Bir çıkıp girersen.
Engin
Faruk,
abi ben de seçemiyordum bu arada. Dil seçemiyordum nedense.
Evet
Hiç
ya.
Shift C ile dolu seçiyorsun. Dil değiştiriyorsun.
Hı hı hı.
Control
Shift
miydi?
C ile mi?
Control Shift ya da Shift söyler zaten onu duyarsınız.
Daha
Ama
deneyeceğim arkadaşlar.
bir daha
dakika,
dene
tekrar
istersen.
gireceğim. Bakalım.
Language gibi bir şey dedi. Oradan girip Turkish seçip done yaptım. Ben gördüm onu.
Ya Şebnem seni göremiyorum şu an nedense. Hani senin
Mail adresine girmiş galiba Engin abi en sonda Şebnem.
Şebnem Karakus 4@gmail.
ay ama not joined diyor işte. Yani yoksun
Allah.
sanki. O yüzden bir çıkıp tekrar odaya
Tamam
girer.
hocam.
Faruk sen başta olmazsa olur mu?
Tabii
Tamam.
olur.
Olur. Şebnem istediği yerde
Yalnız
ben de
az önce
yorulursam zaten
Faruk'un
söylerim.
duyduklarını iletti arkadaşlar. O ilk şeyde İngilizce kanalını seçenler.
Ama İngilizce'de duydular. Ben de kanal değiştiremiyordum orada.
He, biz de Şebnem'i Türkçe'de duyduk. Yani.
Tuhaf. Ya ben acaba ikimiz bir arada mikrofonu mu açmamamız gerekiyor? Yani siz beni de duymak isteyince açtım. O zaman gitti.
Interpreter olarak mı?
Evet, interpreter olarak.
Bir daha başlatıyorum.
Bakalım.
Tamam bir bakalım.
Bir daha başlatıyorum arkadaşlar.
Başlatın hocam bir.
Başlattım şu an.
Ben sadece bir açık kalayım.
Hı hı. Şu an itibariyle başlattım. Faruk'un gitmiş olması lazım. Faruk'u duyabiliyor olmaları lazım. Duyabiliyor musunuz Faruk'u?
Duyuyoruz, duyuyoruz, duyuyoruz.
Beni duyuyor musunuz?
Faruk ben seni duyuyorum abi. Hayır.
Tamam.
Hayır.
Turkish'e geçebilirsiniz arkadaşlar.
Ben
Faruk.
geçtim. Sesim geliyor mu?
Ben
de
Bana
geçtim.
gelmedi.
Buradasın.
Arkadaşlar Faruk'u duyuyor musunuz? Ben duymuyorum ama siz olmalı.
geldi ya.
Hayır.
Evet Faruk'u duyuyoruz.
Şu an duyuyoruz Faruk'u.
Tamam
Çok
okey
güzel.
sorun yok o zaman.
Arka tarafta çok arkadan geliyor belgesel.
Evet
gibi
çok
gayet
kısık.
iyi.
Aynen
tamam.
harika.
Onlar bizi duyuyor mu?
Arkadaşlar herkes artık sessiz olsun ya da
Yok,
mikrofon.
biz
Ha, iyi. Ya şeye girdim.
Faruk susmalarını söyler misin? Ben duyamıyorum da beni duymuyor.
Faruk kayda hazır olduğumuzda bana haber et de başlatayım abi.
Çağrı kaydı
O
başlamış.
zaman
Faruk
Çağrı.
başarılar diliyorum. Eminim çok
kolaylıklar.
Kolay gelsin ama
Başarılar
bizi şu anda
Faruk.
webinar dinleyici arkadaşlar
Herkes
duyuyordur arkadaşlar.
okeylensin
O yüzden
kaydı
susalım.
öyle başlatayım ben. Taziyeler, tebrikler bittikten sonra.
Çağrı 5 4
Başlat.
3, 2, 1. Okay. Gamze, please.
Kayıttayız.
Hello everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, no
Yeah,
problem.
okay,
Greg,
great.
can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay,
Great.
thank you. Okay.
First of all, we would like to thank you for your understanding and patience. Welcome to our first evening session in 7th White Cane and Accessibility Festival. We are so glad to have you in our festival, and thank you so much for joining us. First of all, I would like to introduce myself for Greg and for our audience. I am Gamze Sofuoğlu. I graduated from the Department of Psychology in Boğaziçi University and made my master degree at the same university in cognitive psychology. And I've been working in a digital operator, and I'm responsible for the mobile applications for disabled individuals. Since 2013, I am the member of Association of Barrier-Free Access. Today, we will talk about accessible science. Actually, this topic is so interesting and exciting for us because, you know, most blind students prefer to study in especially social sciences like psychology, sociology, law, and so on. So maybe the reason is the lack of accessible solutions and sufficient opportunities for those students. Maybe because of that, we don't prefer to study in those branches, but Greg is a very important example for, I think, especially for young blind students and their teachers and their parents. So we are so excited to have Greg here today. Greg, welcome. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and joining us. We are so glad to have you here. Yes, I give the floor to you now, but before that, if you have any questions, please write on chat section in Zoom or YouTube channel, our YouTube channel. And at the end of the talk, Greg's talk, we will share all of them with him. Yes, Greg, the stage is yours.
Okay, teşekkürler. Merhaba, that's the extent of all of the Turkish I know. I realized yesterday actually that I know someone who spent some time in Turkey, and so he attempted to teach me some. So any mispronunciation is my fault, not his. Thank you for coming and for waiting. I apologize for not realizing about the time change. But my name is Dr. Greg Williams. I live currently in Lafayette, Indiana. So that is about a 2-hour drive from Chicago, to give you a rough idea of where I live. I apologize in advance. I'm still getting used to doing presentations without a live audience feedback, and it's a bit unusual to sit in a silent room and talk to myself. So my background.
Greg, very sorry. Şebnem seni gönderiyorum şu an interpretation'a. Sen de gidebilirsin. Okay. Greg, continue.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So a bit about myself. I was born, I grew up in the state of Indiana, close to Chicago. I was born with glaucoma. So when I was very little, I could see some big blotches of color and some motion. But from about the age of 5, the only vision I have had is very limited light perception. So if lights are very bright in a room, I can tell that they're on. I went to a public school, so just a normal school, not a school for the blind. And I had a teacher, I called her my Braille teacher. Now, normally it's the teacher of vision impaired, who was my teacher from when I started kindergarten until I finished high school. So for the first 4 years of education, I met with her for half a day, and she taught me Braille, orientation, mobility, and all of the other blindness skills that I needed to learn in order to succeed. I was always interested in science, and my parents and my Braille teacher both were all very strong advocates for enabling me to do anything that I wanted to pursue. So when teachers would have concerns about how they were going to teach a blind student in a science or in a math course, they would come and they would talk with Mrs. Wilkening, and she would tell them, you worry about teaching and you let me take care of the rest and it will all be fine. And it all was. So I made it through high school, or I went through high school and took all of the science courses available in our school. I took math up through calculus in high school. And then I went to Indiana University, and I got earned Bachelor of Science degrees, so technically 2 degrees, one in math and one in chemistry. And I graduated in 2000. And I'll talk a little bit more later about how some of that actually worked. But while I was an undergraduate at university, I realized that for me, the idea of doing an experimental PhD in chemistry did not make sense. I wasn't sure how I would carry it out, and it didn't seem practical. So instead, I decided to pursue a PhD in theoretical and computational chemistry. So what that essentially means is I was working to develop computational models to model how molecules interact with each other. My senior year of university, my final year of university, one of my professors encouraged me to apply for a Churchill Scholarship. And the Churchill Scholarship is for students from American universities to go to the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom and study math or science for a year. I was very blessed and fortunate to receive one of those. So starting in the autumn of 2000, I studied at the University of Cambridge. It so happened that year while I was there was also the year that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation gave the University of Cambridge $200 million to start the Gates Cambridge Scholarship. And I applied and was selected as one of the scholars for the first year of the scholarship. So I was able to continue my PhD work in Cambridge and finished my PhD and graduated from the University of Cambridge in July of 2005. After that, I actually took a bit of a different direction, and I taught high school, both science and non-science courses for 2 years. And then I decided that what interested me was seeing if I could get involved in the effort to make the courses that I wasn't able to do independently, able to be accessible and to be done independently by blind students. So I reached out to an acquaintance from when I was in college. When I was in college at Indiana University, there was another student named Carrie Sapalo, who was studying at Purdue University, which is another university in Indiana. And he was also studying chemistry. And so as part of his PhD work,
Nasıl
he
yapacağım?
started looking into
Doğru mu gireceğim?
development of tools
Sunum açık şu anda kulağımda.
to make experiments accessible to blind students. And he started a company called Independent Science. And so in 2012, I started working with Independent Science. That same year, I started a postdoctoral research fellowship at Purdue University with a group called the Institute for Accessible Science. And since that time, that has been my career. I've worked in both science accessibility and web accessibility. And my favorite part of that is getting to talk with groups of teachers and students and parents about what the current state of science accessibility is and what is possible. So with that being said, let me get into the meat of my talk, which is about science and math accessibility. So in math and science course, well, in science courses, math is sort of a related topic that we'll cover because it's necessary for science. But in science courses, there are typically two components. There is the lecture component, and then there is the lab component. So I'll divide this up into two pieces. First, we'll talk about the lecture and access to information, and then we'll move on and discuss access to lab courses. So there have been studies done in the United States, and what has been found is that when blind students are young, they express just as much interest in science as do their sighted peers. And I am making an assumption, but my assumption is that this carries over across national borders. This isn't unique to the United States. And so as they track that interest, as students go through education, what they discover is, so like I said, in elementary school, the interest is, or primary school, the interest is just as high for blind students as it is for sighted students. As they move into middle school and high school, the interest of blind students starts to lessen, to get smaller and smaller. And by the time they're in undergraduate and then graduate degrees, there is a very wide gap between the number of students number of blind students who are interested in pursuing degrees in science versus the percentage of sighted students who express interest in science. And there are a couple of reasons that I think play into this. So one is the actual or perceived inaccessibility of science courses. And the actual or and the perceived inability of blind students to succeed in science courses. So, you know, as you know, when expectations for a student are set low, that student starts to form certain expectations of themselves. So if parents and if teachers and other educators don't think that a student can succeed in science classes, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that student loses interest and does not pursue science. Like I said before, I was very fortunate in that, whereas a lot of people I know, including Carrie Sapalo, in high school, when they wanted to take upper level science and math courses, were told there's no way that you can do it. I was always told, yes, of course you can succeed in that. Yes, of course you can, you know, well, succeeding was up to me, but yes, of course we will work with you to make that happen. And I only, as an adult, I think, realized exactly how much time my Braille teacher put into producing materials so that I could stay and succeed in science courses. Because when I was in high school, you know, we didn't have computerized Braille translation software was a very new thing. And so she did most of the brailing by hand. So the next thing, so let's accept that blind students have innately just as much interest in pursuing science as sighted students, and look at the things that need to happen to encourage them to pursue that, and to see the numbers increase in interest, to see that gap narrow in interest as they get older. So the first thing I would say is, for anyone wanting to pursue, to succeed in science, one of the prerequisites, one of the necessary requirements is a good basis in Braille usage. I don't know the numbers worldwide, but the numbers in the US are something like this. Roughly 70% of blind people are unemployed. However, of those who know Braille, 80% of them are employed. So you go from a 70% unemployment rate of non-Braille users to a 20% unemployment rate of Braille users. So that alone is a very big reason, I think, to pursue, to make sure that you know Braille, and that as parents or as teachers, to advocate for students to have access to learning Braille. The other reason that I think it's absolutely important in math and science is because it just is much more efficient. So when I'm doing a complicated math problem, using a Braille writer and paper, and writing the steps of the math out in Braille on paper, and being able to refer back to them, is much more efficient than either trying to do it using text-to-speech on a computer and having to go back and forth between lines and read whatever system of math I'm using, or even using a one-line Braille display. Now, I have done it used all of those methods at times to do it, but using a Braille writer and a full sheet of paper and being able to quickly reference what was written is very helpful. I know that some people do math in their head completely without reference to any thing written, and I applaud that, and I do it as well. But when it comes to very complicated mathematics, it just becomes much more efficient and much less prone to errors and mistakes if you're doing it on paper in Braille. So that's the learning Braille part of it. Now, the other part of it, though, is having access to information. And I don't know the state of things in Turkey. In the US, because of the laws, the way it works is when students are in elementary school and high school, schools are required, if the student's main method of learning is Braille, schools are required to get textbooks produced in Braille. So when I was in high school, all of my textbooks were in Braille, and that was great. I loved it. However, then I got to college, to university, and it was drastically different. Producing a book, a math or science book in Braille can cost upwards of several $1,000s. And so when I got to college, now all of my books were audio recordings. At that time on cassette tapes. Now you can download them as Daisy books, etc. So unfortunately, the availability of information, of math and science information in Braille is not as wide as we would like it. The hope, of course, is that as more and more things go to electronic texts, that would be something that could be done easily and on the fly using Braille display, etc. But the reality of it is not so straightforward. The reality of it is that Braille, that electronic texts for math and science are not as accessible as we would like. It is still the case that many textbooks for school that are produced by publishers use images for mathematical equations. This is true of journals and academic journals as well. And so, those things are inherently inaccessible unless you have someone that can, unless they have actually provided alt text, which unfortunately is not overly common. But MathML, so let me step back and address MathML. So MathML is a language, a markup language, much like HTML is used for producing text on the web. MathML is a markup language for mathematical content. And if text, or if mathematical equations, if math and science are marked up using MathML, then with JAWS and NVDA and VoiceOver on Mac computers, that is the MathML is converted into a verbal version of the math equation that is useful. And so that way, when publishers use MathML, then it is relatively straightforward and easy to access that math with a screen reader. This part, in English, it's easy as well using a screen reader and a Braille display to read that math in Braille. The screen readers will convert math into the English system of mathematical Braille is called the Nimeth code. I am aware that there is a code for math in Turkish Braille, but unfortunately I don't know the details of it to know what the state of the ability of screen readers to take MathML and output it in Turkish Braille math on a Braille display is.
Unfortunately, there is nothing. Yes, there is Turkish Braille code, but it is not convertible to computer, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, okay. Well, that's something that I would love to talk with you or anyone else about in the future to see, what could potentially be done. Because having access to electronic content in Braille on the fly is at this point almost a necessity in some instances. So I would, it would be great to move that forward. I know, the Braille translation software, LibLouis, does have tables for Turkish Braille, and I don't know if there's, a way of working with them to get Turkish math or Turkish Braille math included in there, so that it could potentially, but that's something that, if you or someone else is interested, I would love to talk about in the future.
Sorry, the translator, if you wish, you can change each other. Şebnem, if you wish, you can take the order, if you wish.
Yeah, I can go on. Ben devam ediyorum.
Okay. And sorry if the way I'm doing this could be made easier for your translators.
Çevirmenler için.
Sorry, Şebnem.
Evet,
Senin sesini ben duyuyorum. Demek ki geçmedin sen ya. Olmadı. Faruk, please continue. Sorry.
No problem. So when I was in university,
Şebnem'i az önce duymuştuk aslında.
Undergraduate.
Ama sen bu odadasın Elif.
Evet, Şebnem'i duymuştuk.
Okey. Şebnem.
Ben devam edeyim mi?
Şebnem'in sesi ve Gray'in sesi çok yüksekti ama.
Evet, Greg'in sesi de.
Please, Şebnem,
Evet.
Şebnem'i siz
Bizim
ama
yeniden
buradan...
mor yapmamız gerekiyor olabilir mi?
Hayır, bir dakika. Greg, wait a minute. Arkadaşlar siz burada olduğunuz için Şebnem'i buradan duyuyorsunuz ama Greg'i de duyuyorsunuz aynı şekilde. Yani olmamış. Faruk, please continue.
Okay.
Şebnem'i az önce duyduk.
Ama Grey'i de duyduk.
Hayır, Şebnem konuşur musun?
Şebnem konuş. Konuşuyor mu Şebnem şu an?
Ben buradayım.
Biz şu anda duyuyoruz.
Duyuyoruz.
Arkadaşlar
duyuyorsunuz.
hepimiz duyuyoruz ama biz de
Arkadaşlar
duyuyoruz.
olmuyor. Tamam.
Sorunuz var.
Lütfen tamam sessiz olun. Faruk, please continue. Faruk, okay. Sorry Greg.
Yeah, no problem. So what I was
Duyuyoruz.
Evet.
Okay. Faruk, okay, you can go on.
Okay. When I was in university, MathML was not widely used. And the other thing about MathML is it's great for reading content, but writing MathML by hand to produce content that a sighted person can read is not it's not practical. You don't, most people don't enjoy writing HTML by hand, and the same is true for MathML. It's meant to be written by computers. So when I was in university, though, there's a typesetting language called Latex, and it is completely text-based. And so most mathematicians and scientists would produce their professional papers, etc., in Latex, and then you take it and run it through a processing program, which then changes it to visual math and to the correct format and layout, etc. And so when I was doing my PhD and I needed to read journal articles, unfortunately, most of those at that time were not available from the publishers in an accessible format. So what I would do is I would just email the authors of the journal article and ask them if they had written the journal article in LaTeX. And most of the time, 9 times out of 10 at least, the article had been written in LaTeX, and they would usually very kindly send me the source of the LaTeX source of the paper, which I could then read. Again, it's not a language that's designed really to be read verbally, although there are some programs that take the LaTeX and convert it into an audible form that is easily consumed. But I would take it and either put it in hard copy Braille or on my Braille display, and then I could read the journal article for myself with all of the math content accessible. Unfortunately, that still meant that I had to do some interpretation on my own, but it was at the time the most accessible method of getting especially upper level math and science. And it is still something that many scientists use to produce papers. So as a blind student, if you're interested in particular in doing university level math or science, it is something that is worth learning, to be able to, firstly, to be able to produce printed output that is visually appealing and works for sharing with a sighted colleague, but also because the content that other people produce is then fully accessible to you if you understand how to read and interpret LaTeX. So the next component of this is tactile graphics. And again, data visualization is now a huge thing. How to analyze data, how to look at it and interpret it. And there have been, there's been some work done in sonification, so taking data and converting it to an audio output to give, especially when looking at data online. So there's a program, statistics program called SASS or SAS, or sorry, SAS, SAS that has a Chrome extension that will, if the graphs are produced within SAS, it will output them in an audible form where it correlates tones to different data points. And so a blind user can quickly get an overview of what the data looks like. And this is, found use in other areas as well. In fact, when I get to the Talking Labquest, we actually have the ability there to sonify data as well. But still, tactile graphics are an essential component of being able to learn in a science course. Graphs with actual braille numbering along the axes, so that a student can look at the graph and not just get an idea of the shape of it, but quantitatively figure out where the maximum and the minimum are, etc. Looking at chemical structures, again, there are methods for writing those in a way that can be interpreted. But for complex structures, a tactile graphic is by far the easiest method for quickly grasping what the structure of a molecule is. So access to tactile graphics is something that is also necessary. Now let's move on to in some ways, the tougher piece of this puzzle, which is lab accessibility. So the standard approach for having a blind student participate in a lab course is usually referred to as the assistant-directed approach. So what that means is the blind student is working with a sighted partner, whether that is another student in the class within a lab group, or whether it is in university, sometimes they will provide an assistant to work with the student in a lab setting. And so the way that works is the blind student may do some minimal component of the actual hands-on experimentation, but what they are primarily doing is telling the assistant what to do. So, you need to measure out 250 milliliters of sulfuric acid or whatever the case may be, and directing them to perform the experiment, and then relying on the assistant by asking the assistant questions to give them the observational data necessary to analyze the results of the lab. So when I was in school, this was the predominant method, and this was the method that I went through high school and university with. And usually it was you're in a lab group of 3 or 4 partners, and the blind student's role was typically to know the lab procedure, to help make sure that they were doing things in the right order, and then to record data or take notes and help with the analysis, the theoretical part of the lab. And that's good insofar as it goes, but research has shown, and it's we can all identify with this from just our own experience, that doing something like that is a much different experience than actually doing something hands-on. And when we can do things hands-on, when we have hands-on experiences, those are much more transformational and much more engaging. Those are the things that draw students into wanting to pursue science and into wanting to pursue whatever the case may. It's not just limited to science, but hands-on experience is much more engaging than theoretical, than theoretical access to something. So, it's useful, and I'm grateful for the partners that I had, and I was able to do some things in the lab courses. I could do measure volumes for some liquids that weren't particularly dangerous. I wasn't going to mess with sulfuric acid typically, and I could do some of the experimentation, but it was very limited, and there was no way that I could be a professional chemist using the directed assistant approach. So then what is the option? Well, we'll get to that in a minute, but before we do that, just talk in general about tips that are necessary for a blind student to succeed in lab. And the biggest thing I'm going to tell you for a blind student to succeed in lab is preparation, right? So a sighted student, a lot of times, they'll look through the lab procedure, but they don't really know the lab procedure very well, because when they get into the lab, they can quickly skim it as they're doing the lab. And okay, I've done step 1, what's step 2? Well, for a blind student, that's a much slower process. So the blind student needs to be much more prepared coming into lab. The blind student needs to have read the lab procedure thoroughly, have thought about it, understood it, and be ready to know exactly what the steps are. Especially if you're working in a lab group, because if you are able to say, okay, when your sighted colleagues, when your sighted partners are trying to figure out what the next step is, if the blind student is able to say, well, actually, this is the next step, that improves their standing among their peers. So being able to, being prepared, knowing it beforehand. In a lab course, then, the next thing I would say that is important is consistent organization. So that means making sure that things are always placed in the same places so that the student knows exactly where they are, and there's much less likelihood of something getting knocked over or spilled or there being an accident. So a student must be very familiar with the layout of the lab. The student must know where all of the various pieces of lab equipment are throughout the lab itself, if they need to go get a chemical or get, whatever the case may be, get something necessary for the lab. On their own lab station where they're doing the lab. And this requires, again, being an advocate for yourself, because you have to work with your partners to get them to buy into this, to get them to understand that this is necessary. And so that is, on your lab station, making sure that there's a consistent arrangement of things. And that when a sighted partner picks something up, they have a tendency to just put it down wherever, because they can just look and see, oh, there it is. But getting them to understand that putting it back, putting things back exactly where they got them from, so that the blind student is aware of where everything is during the course of the lab is very important. One of the things we recommend is actually using a cookie sheet or a cake pan, some sort of metal tray, to put all of the things that are necessary for the lab on. This is for 2 reasons. One, it creates a very defined space where everything is and where everything is organized. 2, it also provides a bit of a protection in case there is a spill. It's contained within the tray. So both from a safety standpoint and an organizational standpoint, we like the idea of using a metal tray of some sort, be it a cookie sheet or a cake pan, depending upon what, how large of a space you need. The other thing that blind students have to be aware of is that all of the safety precautions that are necessary for sighted students are also necessary for blind students. That includes wearing goggles when you're doing a lab experiment. You know, the chemicals are not discriminatory. Chemicals do not discriminate between blind students and sighted students, and they will get in a blind student's eyes just as readily as they will in sighted students. And so, you know, being aware of all of the safety apparatus, and being aware of all of the safety precautions, and following them is an absolute essential for a blind student in a lab setting. I'm just looking, okay, yeah. So now, how to actually carry out, what are some adaptations in a lab setting? So some of the things that I'll talk about are more technological in nature, but some of the best lab adaptations are actually very simple. So a very common one for measuring volumes is to a notched syringe. So you take a syringe and have someone who is sighted pull the plunger of the syringe out to the volume that needs to be measured, and then with a file or some sort of blade, just notch the plunger of the syringe next to the barrel, so that
duyuyorsan evet der misin?
So the blind student can then very easily figure out when they've measured out the right amount. So all you do is put the syringe down into the liquid, pull the plunger back until that notch reaches the top of the barrel of the syringe, and you've got the correct volume. There are other methods for measuring volume. One option are pipettes. There are pipettes for specific volumes, and so a student can have a set of pipettes that are labeled. So if they need to measure 1 milliliter versus 5 milliliters, they can pick out the correct pipette and use that. Again, there are other options as well. For beakers, one of the things, a simple way of doing it is to take a plastic beaker and just cut a small hole at the level of the beaker where the volume needs to reach. And so that way, when it is filled, when it reaches that level, now again, you need to do this in somewhere where you can contain liquids, because the way this works is when it reaches the level of that slot or that hole, it begins pouring out, and that tells the student that they've gotten the correct volume. When I was in college, actually, one of my professors, we were doing an analytical chemistry lab, and we had to use a syringe to inject a small sample of the chemical into an instrument. And he said that when he was in graduate school, one of his lab partners was lazy and didn't like having to look at the syringe. So he took a small thin piece of wood, dowel rod, and just cut it to the correct length to lay. So he would put it against the side of the plunger and pull the plunger up and then push it down until it hit the top of the stick. And so my professor actually cut one to the correct size for the the volume of injections we were doing. And that enabled me to very quickly be able to draw up the correct amount and inject it. So those are some simple adaptations for volume. There are a myriad of a lot of different methods of adapting labs, depending upon what the lab is and what the setting is. And if there are specific questions later, I can address those. But at this point, I want to turn to actually a piece of technology that Independent Science, the company that I work with, has helped.
Greg, maybe you might share screen if you try. There should not be any problem in your sharing. Maybe
Okay, yes, I will in a couple of moments. Is my video showing? Can anyone tell?
Arkadaşlar, Sighted Friends. Greg, do you see the video of Greg? I am also blind, Greg. I don't know.
Ve beni duyabiliyor musunuz?
Duyuyoruz Şebnem, sen konuşma. Okay. Gören arkadaşlar.
Let me just double check.
Gören arkadaşlar, videosunu görebiliyor musunuz Greg'in?
No, we can.
Okay.
They can't see Greg. Maybe you should try again.
Yeah,
We can see.
You can see? You can?
Yes, see.
Yeah, they can.
Okay.
Greg,
All right,
they
perfect.
can.
Okay, so I'll use my video for a few minutes and then I will switch to sharing my screen. Okay. So one of the issues in labs, of course, is being able to take measurements of the data that is being collected. And let me move things around slightly here. And so I will do a quick demonstration in a minute, but let me show you. So here I'm just holding up now my lab tray, which is a cake pan. And I also have my beaker, which is just one of my kids' plastic cups. But it works great for the demonstration that I'm going to do. Okay, so what I'm going to demonstrate today is what we call the Talking Labquest 2. Let me just make sure that...
Gamze, till now, maybe if there is a question, can we take it before demo?
Oh, sure, yeah, we can take a pause and take some questions now, absolutely. Okay.
Okay, maybe at the maybe Merve collect the questions, and after the demonstration, we can ask them to Greg. It will be better, I think.
Okay, so we'll hold off.
You can demonstrate. While you are demonstrating, our friends collect the questions.
That sounds like a great plan.
Okay,
if you have any questions, please write on chat section on Zoom or YouTube.
Okay, all right, so there is a device called Labquest, and it is a scientific data collection device. And I'm going to hold up, for those who can see, I will hold up the device. Hopefully it shows up in the video reasonably well. And I'll describe what I'm talking about as I go. But it's a data collection device, which means that it has ports on it that sensors can be connected to. And then it electronically collects data and stores it. It displays it in a graph and in a table. And we'll talk about all of that in a moment. But so just to quickly describe, and this is a device that's made by a company called Vernier, and it's used in high schools and universities throughout the United States, and in fact around the world. There's somewhere in the order of 250,000 Labquest devices across the world being used in both high school and university level courses. And so as part of, so Carrie Sapalo formed a relationship with the owners of Vernier, and we were able to get funding to take this mainstream device and add text-to-speech capability and some other accessibility features onto it, so that a blind student can take the same device that their sighted colleagues, their sighted partners are using, and use it as well. And so Vernier makes, there are somewhere around between 70 and 90 different sensors that can be used with the Labquest and with the Talking Labquest to collect data in science courses. So that ranges from a temperature sensor, which is what I'll be using today, to if you're in chemistry, there are pH meters, there are spectrophotometers, so that's something that measures the spectrum of light, the wavelength of light that's absorbed by a sample. They have drop counters that will measure the volume when you're doing a titration. If you're in physics, they have accelerometers to measure acceleration. They have force sensors to measure forces. You know, you name it, they have a sensor to do it. Biology, you can measure oxygen content, carbon dioxide content if you're doing plant or respiration experiments. So all of those sensors work with the Labquest, and they also work with the Talking Labquest. So what I have here is a rectangular device, and there's a screen on the device, which it's actually a touch screen, but we do not utilize that for the Talking Labquest. We connect a USB keyboard. So on the left side of the device, I actually have a USB keyboard plugged in. Then below that, and I don't know that this will show up on the video, but there are 3 ports that allow sensors to be connected. And then on the right end of the device, there are 3 buttons that allow you to start and stop data collection and to go to the main desktop, etc. The other thing to show is on the top, there are 2 other ports for digital sensors. So the ports along the side are for analog sensors. The ports on the top are for digital sensors, which are things like accelerometers that take hundreds of measurements per second. So this is the Talking Labquest, and now I'm going to get out of here and share my screen. Let me go ahead and share. There we go. Now, can someone confirm that something just showed up on the screen there?
Yeah,
Okay, so hopefully what you should be seeing is now the screen of the Labquest. And I'm going to put the Labquest by the computer here, and I have an external speaker on there that should allow it to be heard. So let me adjust the volume here. That's probably too loud.
Sorry, I am seeing some people are raising their hands. Our students, please take note who raised their hands. And after the speech ends, Gamze, we will give them a speech. Is it possible?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so now what the Labquest has, then let me show you. So we've mapped some quick keys. One of the things we have is if I press F11 on the keyboard, hopefully.
High contrast mode on.
Okay, so now hopefully there should be high contrast mode showing on the screen that I'm sharing, which should hopefully make it easier for people to see. Now let me see where I am at.
Graph page.
Okay.
Push button. Run selector.
Let's get back here.
Sensor page. Phoenix box data collection.
Okay, so what I am in now is what is called the Labquest application. And this is where we will collect data and look at the results. So this is the sensor page, and it shows what sensors are connected. At the moment, there are none, but I'm going to quickly go through a quick explanation, and then I'll come back and do some things in more detail. So then the next thing, if I hit F12, it cycles through the pages on the graph, on the Labquest application.
Graph page. Push button. Run selector.
Hold on, let me slow down this speech a little bit. So if I hit F5, it's slow.
Slower. Slower.
Okay, hopefully that is audible over the audio, over the speaker. So the graph page will actually, as data is being collected, plot a visual graph on the screen.
Data table page, end.
Okay, the data table obviously will, again, display a table of the data, which I can review using the arrow keys to read row by row, or page up and page down will skip me through by larger chunks of data.
Lab instructions page.
So Vernier actually has an entire curriculum of lab courses from elementary school up through university, and some of those lab courses or lab procedures are on the device and can be accessed through the lab instructions page here.
Notes page.
And then there's
link.
just a notes page for taking notes while you're doing your experiment, and then we're back to the sensor page.
Sensor page.
So,
Box data collection.
So let me run through some hotkeys very quickly. So F1 and F2 I can use to adjust the volume. F5 and F6 allow me to speed up or slow down the speech, which is very handy. Before that, we had to go into menus in order to do it, and it took a lot of time. F3 will be the key that I will use to start and stop the collection of data. And so let me go ahead and I'm going to plug in a temperature sensor. So it looks like, for those of you who cook, it looks very much like a meat thermometer. It's just a long steel probe with a little temperature sensor at the end that then attaches to a cord that plugs into the Labquest. So I'm going to plug it in. And
CH1, temperature 23.8 degrees Celsius. CH1, temperature 23.8 degrees Celsius. Speech disabled.
And so what you immediately hear is it begins speaking. So when you plug a sensor in, the Labquest automatically starts showing live data of what the readings are. And when I plug it into the talking Labquest, the Labquest immediately begins the talking Labquest immediately begins verbalizing what the temperature or what the reading is from that sensor. So it's telling me, CH1 tells me that it's plugged into channel 1 or port 1, and it gives me the current temperature. So, if you're doing a lab where it doesn't really matter, you don't need to collect data, then literally all you have to do is plug the sensors in, put them in whatever you need to do for measuring, and the Labquest, the talking Labquest, will give you the feedback of what the data is or what the measurements are that are happening, and you can, just go that way. But for lab courses, most of the time we need to collect data over a period of time and then analyze that data for various features. Hold on, let me just look quickly. Okay. Okay. So before I do the demonstration, let me show you a couple of other things that the Labquest does have. Well, actually, I'll tell you about them. So one thing it has is an accessible periodic table. So if I go out to the main desktop with F4, oops, I disabled speech. Let me re-enable it.
Speech enabled. Labquest application. Sensor page.
Okay, let me go to
main desktop.
Okay. So here, if I use the arrow keys, then
calculator, periodic table.
There's the periodic table, and if I hit enter on it quickly, it will bring
periodic
up
table of elements, hydrogen.
Periodic table of elements, which I can scroll through using the arrow keys. So if I hit right from hydrogen, it jumps me all the way to helium. I can jump back or go down row and go through the noble gases.
Argon.
And then if I press enter on it, which I'll go ahead and do,
argon. Name, argon.
What it brings up is a list of properties of argon. So it gives me, well, argon is not as interesting, but if I, for instance, brought up sodium, it would give me the melting point of sodium, the boiling point of sodium, the density, etc. So it gives me lots of different properties that are easily accessible if I happen to need them for a lab and so on. If I go back to the main desktop, there's
system folder.
There's also a scientific calculator that is accessible. We've made a key mapping very similar to some of the Braille note takers that you can just input whatever the calculation is that you need to do, and it's completely accessible. So let's go back to the Labquest application.
Labquest app. Labquest application. Sensor page. CH1. Temperature 23.6 degrees Celsius.
Okay, now I'm going to
CH1. Menu. File. Menu item new.
So F10 brings up the menus, and I'm doing that actually right now just because it pauses the speech as well of the readouts. So let me tell you what I'm going to do. I have a cup of water. It's my beaker, and I'm going to put the temperature sensor into the water. Now I'm going to open a package of Alka-Seltzer tablets. So I've got 2 Alka-Seltzer tablets, and the experiment for today is I'm going to drop them into the water and monitor what the temperature does as they dissolve. Now, unfortunately, I'll be the only one that can hear the nice, satisfying fizz as they dissolve, but let's see what happens to the temperature, whether it goes up or down or stays the same. Let me get back to the main.
CH1, temperature 24.3 degrees Celsius.
Okay, so my water is about room temperature, give or take.
Temperature 24.3 degrees Celsius.
Let me get my Alka-Seltzer tablets.
CH1, temperature 24.3 degrees Celsius.
I'm going to press F3 to start data collection and drop them in.
Temperature 24.3, collection started. 24.3.
Drop them in, and we'll just see what happens to the temperature for a couple of minutes.
24.2. 24.1. 24.0. 23.8. 23.7.
And so it is going down.
23.5. 23.4. 23.3. 23.1. 23.0. 22.9. 22.9. 22.8. 22.8. 22.7. 22.7.
Okay, we'll go ahead and stop there.
22.7. Collection ended.
So I hit F3 again to
22.7.
end the data collection. Now,
22.7.
I'm going to hit F12.
22.6. Graph page. Push button. Run selector.
Okay, so now I'm on the graph page, and so for those of you who are able to see, you should see a graph plotted there, which doesn't do me a lot of good. But if I bring up the menus under F10,
menu, file, menu item new.
I'm going to go to the right.
Menu, graph, menu, sonify, menu item, sonify options.
Okay, so here we have a sonify menu. And so if I down arrow.
Menu, start sonification.
So here I can start sonification of the graph, and you'll hear what it is for those of you that aren't familiar with sonification, but it essentially just converts the data points to a tone. So we'll hit enter.
Menu item temperature.
And that's the one we want. So we'll hit enter on temperature.
Push button. Run selector.
And so what you heard there is it demonstrated, it started out higher and went down. It sounded like fairly steadily, almost linear, probably not quite, but a fairly linear decrease in tone. Obviously, if it were a parabola, it would start out high, drop down quickly, and then start up slowly, and then come back up quickly. So it gives a very quick qualitative overview of what the data looks like. So a student can form a pretty good image of roughly what the data looks like. But in science courses, we want quantitative usually. So I'm on the graph page, and if I hit tab,
push button, store run.
Okay, hit tab again.
Plot details box, run 1 temperature.
So there's a plot details box. If I hit enter on this.
Plot details, push button, okay.
Okay, let's tab.
Expandable section statistics open.
And so now what is displayed on the screen is a list of statistics about my graph, about my data. And if I down arrow.
Min, 22.7 at 53.5.
Okay, so it tells me that my minimum was 22.7 degrees at 52.5 seconds. If I arrow down again.
Max, 24.3 at 0.0.
Okay, that makes sense. It was highest when I started.
Mean, 23.4.
And my average, so I have my minimum, my maximum, my average, my mean.
STPF, 0.55807.
It gives you your standard deviation.
Samples, 150.
How many
Delta
samples?
1.6.
It gives me the range of my Y values.
Delta X, 57.0.
And the range of my X values. So it's a very
push button, okay.
Quick overview of
Labquest application, graph page,
of
plot
what,
details box, run 1 temperature.
I'll wait until it stops talking. It's a very quick overview of my data. And for a lot of science experiments, the minimum and the maximum are really about maybe, and the average are oftentimes what is needed. Now, if I need to go into the data more in a more detailed fashion, if I hit F12,
data table page.
We have the data table, which I can then use my arrow keys to review. So if I press down arrow.
Text box run 1, 0.0, 24.3, 0.5, 24.3.
Okay, so there it's just reading the X value and the Y value as a row. Now let's say I had multiple sensors connected. And so there were 3 columns and I forgot what column was which. If I press right arrow.
Column header temperature degrees C, table cell, 24.3.
So it gives me exactly what the column header is. So it tells me that that column is temperature in degrees Celsius. And again, I can press page down to jump down.
4.5, 24.2.
By more rows, etc. And so that gives me, a way to go into depth into what my data is if I need to know the exact temperature or the exact value at a specific time, etc. Now, there are other things that you can do with this if necessary, though. If I need more analysis, I can export my data and move it over onto a computer and then use Excel or whatever method of data analysis I'm most comfortable with. I can also connect this to there's a way to send an image of the graph to a Tiger embosser to get a Braille version of the graph. Likewise, if I export it into Excel, and I have a Tiger embosser, I can use I can emboss my graph from Excel. So there are ways of exporting data, of doing more analysis of the data. And this, again, allows, obviously this is a very simple experiment that I'm doing, but it shows you that it allows a student to independently take the measurements, collect the data, analyze the data. And it doesn't matter what the course is, whether it's biology, physics, chemistry, it gives them access to all of the instrumentation, all of the sensors that they would need to create those, or to carry out those experiments. Now, the Talking Labquest, when normally ships with English, we do have a few other languages, unfortunately not Turkish yet, but we are working to implement more languages, but it is available in English, German, French, Italian, Spanish, and I think Portuguese, if I'm remembering correctly. So there's about 6 different languages that you can get it in. And so this, is obviously there are other methods of doing, accessible science, but this is in my opinion, it's at the moment one of the ones that gives the most accessibility across a broad array of science courses. And the thing that I really like about it, is that it's the same device that in many schools the students' classmates or colleagues will be using. It's not a specialized device made specifically for blind students, but it's a mainstream device. And I think with that, I will open it up and we'll answer questions. And that way you learn the things you want to learn instead of the things I want to tell you. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention.
Dear Greg, many thanks for your excellent demonstration and talk. I think they are so inspiring for blind students, their parents and teachers. Is there any questions?
Suspending.
Yes, there are two questions.
Mm-hmm.
Ask.
Hello. Firstly, I'm conveying the question of Habil Bozkurt. Did you have the opportunity to use tools such as Braille ruler, set square, and compass during your education?
Yes, I did. So I used, I actually used all of those. I used the Braille ruler in math courses and science courses throughout my schooling, and in math courses I also used Braille compasses to draw figures in geometry, etc. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you. The other question from Mohammed Özcan. He asked, I'm senior student in high school now, and I want to study chemistry in USA in the future. What do you think that which university should I study so it can be beneficial for me?
Which university? Well, there are many options. So, I went to Indiana University and they have a decent chemistry program. Purdue University, which is also in Indiana, so Purdue has a pretty good reputation or history of working with blind students to make things as accessible as possible. So that would be a good option. But I mean, there are numerous, universities that are definitely possibilities. That one's kind of a hard one to give a specific answer to, because you range from Harvard to Berkeley to what we call state schools. So Purdue University, Indiana University schools that are funded by the state, and there are many good schools in that category as well. So it really depends on where you want to end up in the U.S. and if there's specific things that draw you to a certain university as opposed to another one.
Greg, can you compare the university in terms of accessibility facilities? What could you say about it? Yeah, there are many universities we know, but in terms of providing their facilities to blind people like that.
That one is a hard one. I can only go based on my experience, because there are so many universities in the US that I don't have personal experience with, I only have personal experience with very, very few of them. So Purdue, like I said, has a good history of working to make courses accessible. I know blind students have attended and pursued science degrees at, like, for instance, Berkeley, University of California at Berkeley. The University of Texas or Texas A&M, both have had blind students go through and do science courses. Sometimes the medium-sized schools or universities also are good options because it is a smaller setting and the professors have more ability to work directly with the student. So, for instance, I'm thinking of Miami University in Ohio, which is it's not small, it's 17,000 students, but it is not a large university. And they have worked very closely. In fact, I do work with them to evaluate web accessibility for things as well. So, there's lots of options. I don't, sometimes you can maybe Google and find out, find stories or testimonials of students that have gone to different schools to do science at different universities. But those off the top of my head are the ones, I know there's a small university in Pennsylvania called Haverford that worked with a blind student doing physics and really did a very good job of working with him to make sure that he had as much access to lab courses as possible. So it really ranges, and there's not one definite answer for that. But Injin, if you would want to pass on my email address to that student, I'm more than happy to have a more in-depth conversation and get more information from him, about his background and what he might be looking for.
Greg, before passing to any other questions, if you permit me a time, I will end the interpretation and start again. Maybe we can take Şebnem with that position. If you wait me 1 minute, only 1 minute. Bu arada başka sorular var mı arkadaşlar? Yani Türkçe'de sorarsanız çeviririz, sorun değil yani.
Evet.
Başka soru yok hocam şu an.
Bir dakika.
Sanki ben alttan chatten Serdar yazdı. Ben bir şeyler sormak istiyorum diye ama sonra
Tamam, Türkçe'de sorabilirler. Parmak kaldıranlar varsa
varsa sorduralım.
Bir dakika.
Bu arada kendiniz İngilizce sormak istiyorsanız öyle de sorabilirsiniz.
Engin abi eline sağlık.
Faruk çok güzel. Eline sağlık. Teşekkür ederiz. Arkadaşlar Faruk duyuyor musun bizi?
Ben sizi duyuyorum ama konuşabilir miyim emin değilim şu an.
Tamam.
Senin beynin gitti.
Aslında konuşmayı kesmek istemedim. İnşallah şimdi olur. Bakalım.
Yok herhangi bir sıkıntı olmadı. Buradan sonra Şebnem alırsa soru cevap kısmı harika olur.
Ben devam edeceğim. Umarım geçebilirim oraya.
Ama işte sen niye not joined görünüyorsun Şebnemciğim ya? Niye öyle görünüyorsun?
Hocam telefondan da baştan katıldım aslında.
Bilgisayardan girmiyor musun?
Bilgisayardaydım. O zaman da not joined göründü. Telefona geçtim.
Bir dakika. Bir kez daha deneyeceğim arkadaşlar. Just a minute. Bu arada siz sorular, parmak kaldıranlar arkadaşlar sorularınız varsa if you have question please raise your hand and people will talk. Arkadaşlar sorularınız varsa lütfen parmak kaldırın ki biz size söz verelim. Yani kendinize sorabilirsiniz. Biz çeviririz onu. Şimdi.
Engin abi, try not to assign me as an interpreter. Just make Şebnem as an interpreter and let's see what will happen then.
I'm totally volunteered.
Eğer başka bir soru yoksa hiç uğraşmaya da biliriz isterseniz. Yani gelmedi.
Benim de sorularımız var aslında Gamze. Benim de var aslında sorularım.
Tamam.
Yani soralım birkaç soru.
Benim sorularım var aslında da el kaldıramıyorum bir türlü.
Siz konuşabilenler konuşsun. Konuşamayanlar el kaldırabilir arkadaşlar. Yani sorun değil. Şu an bir başlatmayı deneyeceğim. Şebnem konuşur musun? Şebnem konuşuyor mu? Şebnem'e bir mesaj gidecek şimdi.
Şu an galiba olacak çünkü Şebnem seni duymuyor galiba.
Beni duymuyorsa Şebnem geçerse belki olacaktır Turkish'e. Faruk eline sağlık. Ben arada baktım, çok güzel çevirdin. Yani arkadaşlar daha iyi söyleyecektir ama ben arada gördüm. Şebnem? Can you hear us, Şebnem?
Şebnem, duyuyoruz seni.
Okay. Oh, very good. Okay. Greg?
Yes.
Yeah. Şebnem, can you translate? Arkadaşlar sorun var mı? Ben size sorayım. Duyuluyor mu Şebnem? Ya biriniz cevap versenize ya. Çağrı, Elif, ne bileyim. Hiçbiriniz yok musunuz?
Duyuyoruz abi.
Şebnem'i duyuyor musunuz?
Ben duymadım konuşuyorsun.
Tekrar more language'den arkadaşlar seçmeniz gerekiyor o yüzden. Please go to more. Again, because I ended interpretation, you can choose. Yeniden yapmanız lazım.
Tamam, yeniden yapalım.
Duyan var mı Şebnem'i?
Duyuyorsun Şebnem.
Çağrı, sen duyuyor musun? Çağrı, sen duyuyor musun Şebnem'i? Duyuyorum dedin sanki.
Demin Türkçe kısmını duydum ben.
Tamam, Türkçe'de duyuyor musunuz şu an Şebnem'i? Arkadaşlar niye kimse cevap vermiyor ya?
Evet duyuyoruz Şebnem.
Duyuyoruz ama Engin abi duymuyor. Birimiz buradan girip ona söyleyebilir mi duyulduğunu?
Tamam, okey, duyuluyor.
Hocam duyuluyor, sıkıntı yok.
Doğru. Beni zor duydukları için. Okay, no problem. Now, let's go, let's ask other questions, okay? I think it is okay. Now, Elif might have a question. Elif, sen Türkçe söyle, ben çeviririm. But yeah, maybe Şebnem will translate it. But there is a problem. If Şebnem, you can hear me, please say Elif and she can ask her question.
Ama beni Engin duyamayacak. Türkçedeyim şu anda.
Okay, I am hearing you. No problem.
Tamam,
I can hear you,
geçiyorum.
please. Niye konuşmuyor ya?
Çünkü Türkçedeydim. Buraya geçmem biraz zaman aldı telefonla. Duyuyorsunuz beni değil mi?
Yeah, okay.
Tamam. Bir kör öğrencinin kimya laboratuvarında neler yapmasıyla ilgili konuşurken sanki çok fazla kör öğrenci varmış gibi. Sanki pek çok bilim insanı...
Onu duyuyoruz. Sen İngilizce devreye girsen ya.
Türkçeyi çevirme Şebnem. İngilizceyi çevirsen yeter. Okay, devam Elif.
Pek çok bilim insanının sanki bilim erişilebilirliğiyle çalıştığına dair bir izlenim alıyorum. Amerika'da ne kadar yaygın bilim alanında, matematik alanında eğitim alan ya da çalışan körler?
Gamze, could you want to translate it or?
I'm not successful in translation.
Okay,
Please, you
no
can.
problem.
Yes.
Elif is asking, Greg, Elif is asking that you mentioned about a blind person. How can a blind person working in a lab very good? And I think that there are many blind people who study chemistry or lab issues. How many people are you guessing who are studying science and math in ABD? What can you do? You have any? It is as a very common point, or it is a very less issue?
Numbers are hard to estimate, but it's not a large number. So if I think of blind people who have, let's see, blind people who have studied chemistry that I am personally aware of is probably on the around 15 or 20. But I know that actually there are more and more blind students not just in chemistry, but in science in general in the US that are going into college in order to study sciences. So while it is at the moment a fairly small number, so I would guess, maybe, I don't know, maybe 100 a year, maybe in all of the sciences. But it is certainly something that is growing and increasing as, as there are more and more professional role models, as there are, more and more awareness of methods and things, and just awareness that people have done it and that it can be done successfully.
I think Serdar var mı başka sorusu olan? I will give Serdar.
Şeyi eklemek isterim sadece. Türkiye için bu bile çok olduğu için bizim için aslında iyi oldu bunu duymak.
Elif said that it is not good too much, but for Turkey it is also too much because we know maybe Fulya in math and there are very few Hacı. I know some names but there are very few. So it is also very more so she says that. Okay, başka var sorusu olan buradan. Now Serdar. Yeah, Serdar, if you wish you can talk. You can talk Turkish.
Sesim geliyor mu?
Geliyor. You can talk Turkish. Yani Türkçe konuşabileceksin.
Ben şöyle anlıyorum Greg'in anlattıklarından. İlkokuldan lise sona kadar görme engellilerde kaynaştırma eğitimi tamamen kurumsallaştırılmış ve matematik ve fen alanındaki materyallere kolaylıkla erişebiliyorlar. Bu tam olarak böyle mi?
Okay, what Serdar is asking that I understood from your speech that from primary school to end of high school, the inclusive education is totally institutionalized. What I mean by institutionalization is that a blind person beginning from primary school and going to the end of high school can access all of the math and science materials without any inhibition, without any exception?
So that is the way it is supposed to be, yes. Now, it is not always so straightforward, but that is what the law says. The law says that all educational material must be provided to students with disabilities in the form that they are most comfortable consuming it. So for some students, that's electronic texts. For others, it's Braille, etc. Now, unfortunately, because of the cost of Braille, it is in some ways becoming more of a fight, more of a struggle to convince educational school districts that the cost of it is worth doing instead of just giving the student an electronic version of the book, which, electronic versions may or may not be totally accessible. But yes, that is what is supposed to happen.
I think Ziya Yalvaç tries to speak something. Ziya, if you wish, you can open your mic. Ziya, mikrofonunu açabilirsin. Ya pardon, niye ben İngilizce? Neyse, beni anlıyordu herhalde. Şebnem çevir. İngilizce söylediklerimi çevir, Türkçe söylediklerimi çevirme Şebnem.
Yok, çevirmiyor zaten. Sen Türkçeyi çeviriyor.
Okay. Ziya, would you like to speak? Parmak vardı. Başka parmak kaldıran var mı arkadaşlar? İzleri ben önü gördüm ama.
May I have a question? One question.
Alo, sesim geliyor mu Engin abi?
Ya Ziya, please.
Geliyor. Direkt İngilizce soracağım. Translate'e gerek yok.
O süper, daha iyi bizim için.
Okay. Thanks for a lot, Greg. sharing because you share your experiments with us. I want to learn in USA a teacher who is working in primary school, in high school. Yeah. Do he or she support blind students about accessibility?
Yeah.
The situation is institutional or individual. Okay,
so,
thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, as with everything, you know, institutional rules and regulations are great, but it really comes down to the people implementing them. So, you know, in some districts and some school systems, the teachers for the vision impaired are very proactive and advocate for their students and make sure that the things that need to happen. You know, and when you had a teacher in the school system for a long time, they often have developed trust with other teachers. And so those teachers, you know, the science teachers and the math teachers, et cetera, are more willing to kind of go out of their way. So what I found is some teachers, especially science and math teachers, view it as a challenge to make the courses as accessible as possible.
Dedim de öğretmenler
onlar duyuyorlar ya, senin dediğin çevirdiler.
Kurumsal olarak mı destekliyor yoksa bireysel olarak herkes kendi kafasına göre mi karar veriyor?
Ziya'cığım senin sorduğunu çevirdiler zaten, merak etme arkadaş, değil mi arkadaşlar? Şebnem çevirdi Ziya'nın sorusunu. Tamam, merak etme, hani Türkçe. Okay, is there any other hand raised arkadaşlar? Yani var our students, sighted people. Kim var orada bizim?
By the way, we have more time, but maybe Greg, do you have more time for other questions?
Yeah, I can stay on for another 15 minutes or so.
Okay.
We have 15 minutes.
We have 15 minutes.
Kalktı sanki ama o göremedim. Kim kaldırdı ya? Gören öğrenci arkadaşlarımız yardımcı olun lütfen.
Seçil Arıkan.
Seçil nerede? Seçil burada. Okey, Seçil. Siz parmak kaldıranları bana söyleyin arkadaşlar. Bir anda ben Jaws okumuyor hepsini bak ha, ona göre.
Seçil'cim söz sende.
Tamam, o gelir şimdi açar. Üç kişi daha parmak kaldırmış. Evet, Seçil.
Merhaba herkese.
Bitti ya.
Sesimi duyuyorsunuz değil mi?
Evet, duyuyoruz Seçil.
Şeyi merak ediyorum. Erişilebilirlikle ilgili teknolojik çözümler ve Braille ile ilgili çözümler dışında mesela grafik çizimlerinin dokunsal versiyonları, mesela sen de aşinasın Engin, sivel kağıt kullanımıyla yapılan ya da işte Drassman benzeri şeylerle yapılan çözümlere aşinalar mı ve doğru bir erişilebilirlik çözümü olarak buluyorlar mı acaba?
Very good question, I think. She asked, I think you are, I know that you are also working with the tactile graphics. Is it true, Greg? First of all, I will add that question.
Am I working with tactile graphics?
Yeah.
So I did it as part of my postdoc.
Okay. Seçil, the question of Seçil is coming from that area. In addition to Braille and technological solution, how do you look at what is your idea about the for tactile graphic or graphical drawings of some objects or things, or for example, maybe we can use Swell Braille paper like that, or Draftman, you know, with drawing like that. What do you think about those solutions?
So yeah, so those are I mean, that's still what is widely used here for sure. So for producing, you know, images from textbooks or whatever, a swell form paper is a great option. You know,
but
for
it's too expensive.
What?
It is too expensive to wear paper.
So yeah, swell form paper. The draftsman, if you're working with a colleague and need to make a quick image, you know, doing it using the draftsman to draw something by hand is a great option. I've used all of those. You know, Tiger Embosser is pretty decent for producing tactile graphics as well. If you want to go that direction. So, you know, there's any number of options that work and work well. It really depends on what you have available and you know, sometimes what the particular need is. Occasionally one thing is better for a certain type of graphic than another. But yes, all of those options are what, I mean, that's what I use and that's what people I know use.
Thank you. Evet arkadaşlar, Muhammed'in mi parmağı havada? Acaba demin sormuş muydu Muhammed, yoksa
Evet, Muhammed Özcan.
O zaman Muhammed'e söz verelim değil mi?
Bir şey, özür dilerim. Beni daha kapatmadınız. Bir devam edebilir miyim?
Kapatmayacağım Seçil. Tamam korkma. Açtığımı kapatmıyorum. Tamam.
Tamam. Yok. Aslında şeyi merak ediyorum. Şimdi daha öncesinde yani şu anki işinden önce okullarda da eğitimin erişilebilirliği alanında çalışmış ve eğitimci olarak çalışmış birisi olarak yani sınıfta bir görmeyen öğrenci olduğunda ve diğer öğrenciler gördüğünde öğrencinin sınıfta fen dersine diğer arkadaşlarıyla aynı zamanda erişebilmesi, ya öğrenmenin erişilebilir olması için ne tür bir çözüm üretmiş acaba diye merak ettim. Çok anlatabildim mi?
I hope I can translate. We know that Greg, you were teacher and you made chemistry teacher. Is it true?
I taught chemistry, yes. Now, the chemistry classes that I taught, because of the school I was teaching at, only did very limited labs. So it was not as intensive as most chemistry courses would be.
The question is from your educator. As an educator, what do you think that if a blind person is in a class with their sighted peers, if they are in the same class, for him or her to access to all the facilities as the sighted peer can access, which methods are more useful or what can be done? İnşallah doğru çevirmişimdir İngilizce'de arkadaşlar. Yani öyle çevirdiğimi ummak istiyorum. Okay.
So, I mean, it's all of them, and you know, all of what I like to say is it's both and, right? So every method of accessing stuff has its place, and you know, what works one day for what you're doing may not be the best solution for what you're doing the next day, and you have to go to a different option. So, you know, when it comes, for instance, to lab things, obviously, I prefer the ability to do things hands-on. So, you know, if you have access to something like the Talking Labquest 2 or, you know, things that you can use to make the lab as hands-on as possible, that's great. But sometimes it's, for whatever reason, that's not practical or feasible. And so then, you know, you go back to the directed assistant approach and have the student work with partners and do the things they can do. And, you know, otherwise, you know, have them interact and give directions, etc. So it's not, you know, it's never a one size fits all. It's always given what you have, what is the best method that can be used for what you're doing. And, you know, it will honestly vary sometimes from student to student, because sometimes it has to do with the comfort level of the student. For instance, there are methods that a blind student can use to light a Bunsen burner in a chemistry class or biology sometime, independently. And that's great, and it works. But some blind students are not necessarily comfortable, working with a match and lighting a Bunsen burner that has gas coming out of it, etc. And that's okay. So you kind of have to work with the comfort level of the student and what's available to determine what the best approach is.
Thank you. I think değil mi arkadaşlar? Bir Can Kırca, bir de Muhammed'i görüyorum ama Muhammed bir soru sormuştu. Önce Can, sana söz verelim mi?
Hocam ekran paylaşımını kapatalım mı?
Greg, can you close the screen share because of our sighted friend do have difficulty to see all the screen?
Let's see. Did that? Oh, hold on.
Press Alt S.
Yeah, I was pressing it on the keyboard though, which I don't have connected. Hold on. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, you stopped the sharing. Yeah. Can? Ya da Muhammed. Hanginiz önce konuşursa onun sorusunu alacağız. İkisi. O zaman Sevda. Sevda has a question.
Yes, Greg.
Okay.
Greg, hi. Thank you for your fantastic presentation. It's very, very unforgettable for Turkey, especially in young students. And please believe that you draw a good picture for their future projection. Really, it's very important presentation. Thank you at the beginning. I have a question. Could you please a little bit mention about your training journey? I know that it's not very, very easy to journey, to travel on this training life, because have you ever experienced any resistance from your teacher, from your instructor, or any of the person? Or for example, in USA, is there any classification regarding that blind people can do this blah blah blah blah work, but cannot this blah blah blah work? Something like, for example, we have some kind of experience in our country. So could you please a little bit mention your journey and your training travel? Thank you for your participation and for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you. So yeah, officially in the U.S., the blind people can participate, do any career they want, right? So that's the official position. But there are instances where there are hurdles to that. So, for instance, I'm aware of someone who wanted to become a chiropractor, and in order to do that, you have to pass an exam, a national exam set by the certification board. But the certification board basically was not willing to allow accommodations for the student to take the exam in a way that would allow him to do it. So while there was no question, that I think in that particular instance, it was related to reading X-ray images. So technically, in order to qualify as a chiropractor, you have to read X-rays and answer questions about them. although most chiropractors don't actually do that when they practice. So, you know, there was this whole protracted, it actually ended up, I think, at the Supreme Court in the end, a lawsuit that ended up at the Supreme Court because they were not willing to allow accommodations to do this, even though he could, no one denied that he could do the work. So even in the, you know, in the US, there are still barriers that people encounter, bureaucratic barriers, various barriers. In my own experience, I experienced very few sort of overt instances where someone basically said, no, we're not going to let you do that, or you can't do that. When I was in primary school, there was an instance where there was a extra program for students who did well in school to take some extra courses. And because I was classified as a special education student, the school administration didn't, you know, said I couldn't do it. I wasn't part of that program. But my parents and my TVI advocated and got that changed. So a lot of what I experienced, actually, a lot of things were in some ways, in particular in primary and high school, were smoothed over because they could go to, the teachers could go to my teacher of the vision impaired first and talk with her, and she could convince them that, you know, it wasn't a problem. In college, I was very fortunate again, and you know, let me say up front, my story is not, in the US even, is not necessarily the norm. It's not the typical story. Because when I was in college, you know, I basically what I would do is, before the semester started, in several weeks or months, as soon as I knew what courses I was taking, I would go to the professors and I would say, okay, I'd send them an email and say, okay, I'm going to be in your course. You know, I am blind. These are the problems I can foresee that we will have to work around. And these are the methods that I have used in different classes before. You know, can we sit down and talk about what works for you, what you're comfortable with? Because, you know, I had some professors that the way they did exams for me, I had one professor, he recorded the exam on cassette, and then I sat in his office with his cassette, that cassette, and then another tape recorder, and I would record my answers verbally, and then he would just grade it that way. I had other professors that, you know, had different methods that they preferred. But I found in my instance that if I could go directly to the professor and just say, you know, this is what we're doing, or, you know, this is what I have done, and these are some of the ways we've worked around it, and just, you know, kind of very openly discuss with them the ways of the things we might encounter and ways of dealing with it. You know, I never had a professor say openly to me, I don't think that's going to work. We can't do this. You can't be in my course. You know, and again, when I was in Cambridge, the university was willing to work with me. Now, a lot of it when I was in my PhD was left up to me. So if I needed access to stuff, to information or to articles or whatever, you know, it fell to me to figure out how to get that. And if I went to the university and said, okay, I need this specific thing, then they were pretty good about saying, okay, we'll help you with that, you know. But they did not, they were not proactive in developing, you know, or putting things in place to make things more accessible. So self-advocacy is an absolute necessity.
Maybe John, if you wish, you can try.
Yeah, I think I have been unmuted now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Hello, Greg. Firstly, thank you for sharing these valuable information and experiences. Just would like to ask a question. It is not, you know, for chemistry, but mainly for labs, you know. Did you hear or do you have any experience with any devices to measure or to check electric things like phase, maybe voltage, or, you know, AC or DC conversion rates? You know, because I just made some research, but unfortunately I didn't find any, you know, solution or device to get or to use within my home, you know. Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, so that's a that is a tough one. If what you're
Well,
looking
maybe Labquest has this capability as well. I
Oh.
missed it.
well, yeah. So you're absolutely right. It does.
Yeah, I think so.
And if you're, you know, but if you're looking for something for use in the home, right?
Yeah.
The lab.
No, because you know, sometimes I'm just, you know, disassembling computer sciences here, you know, some devices and some hardwares, and we check, you know, by the hardware, for example, to AC DC conversion is, you know, really important for while, you know, disassembling.
Absolutely. So, so you know, the Talking Labquest will do that. There are sensors to do most all of those things. You know, it is fairly, it is not cheap, but you know, it certainly can do it. You know, there used to be a talking multimeter available. I'm not sure if it's still produced or not. I've heard various people say different things, and I haven't searched it out, but you know, at one time there was a talking multimeter available.
Yeah, I'm looking one of those, you know.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. I would have to dig, but if you maybe try Googling talking multimeter, if that's sufficient for what you need. Try Googling that and see if there is still one available. But for sure, you know, otherwise for sure, the Talking Labquest has sensors to measure all of those things.
Yeah, I can understand that it is not for, you know, personal usage, you know. Yeah, it's maybe lab condition, but for personal usage, using a multimeter or, you know, any device to check, you know, for Ethernet cable, for Cat 6 or 7, you know, to inputs and output signals and, you know, AC DC conversion rate, very important for you know, using for computer science and so on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, arkadaşlar sanki Gamze,
I think we are done.
we finished. Bir soru soranlar da vardı ama hiç sormayan biri varsa belki alabilir. Çünkü soru soranlar yeniden kaldırdı sanki.
But I think we should ask Greg as well. Greg, do you have more time?
Yeah, if there are more questions, I'm okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank
Greg
you so
is happy
much.
from question, no problem. Greg, many people can ask. I am warning you. Okay.
Well, I have another meeting in an hour and a half, so I cannot go past that. But
okay. No, maybe
by that point it'll be what, 1 a.m. I think.
Promise we will finish in 10 minutes. Is it okay for you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Arkadaşlar 10 dakikada sordum. Şimdi
We are waiting for your questions.
Sanki Serdar yine sormak istedi. Habib sormak istedi. Başka var mı arkadaşlar sorusu? Muhammed demin bir parmak kaldırmıştı sanki ama. Bir dakika Muhammed. Ya da sormak isteyenler parmak kaldırsın arkadaşlar gözü. Evet. Kimler sormak istiyor? Var mı yoksa bitireceğiz? Kimse kaldırmıyor. Kaldırdı. Arkadaşlar kimler kaldırıyor?
Muhammed Özcan.
Muhammed.
Abi Bozkurt.
Muhammedciğim konuşur musun? Ya da yazan var mı arkadaşlar bu arada? Biz buradan şey yapıyoruz ama YouTube'da falan yazanlar var mı?
Hocam geliyor mu acaba?
Geliyor.
Hocam ben soracaktım. Şimdi ben lisedeyken kimya ve biyoloji olimpiyatlarına katıldım ama bana verilen okutmanların genelde yani kimya ile biyolojiyle pek alakası yoktu. Yani bir eğitim verilmemişti okutmanlara. Acaba Amerika'da nasıl bu tür durumlar, okutman durumları yani?
Oh, very good. Olimpiyat ne demekti yani? Olympics. Muhammed is asking very cleverly. When I was in high school, I attended to math and science Olympics, but because my readers in the exams are not capable enough, this was a bad experience for me. In US, in the exams, are the readers taking any education to read something to a blind person, especially for math or science materials like that?
That is a very good question. So it really depends on where you are. So it's a bit tricky. At university, it depends on whether you're higher. So there's a couple of things. In universities, the universities tend to be very now sort of particular about who they allow to read the exams to a student. And unfortunately, not all universities feel like that student, the reader, should have to have a background in whatever science or whatever course the exam is in, which, you're right, leads to very interesting issues if the reader doesn't know how to properly read the question. So, you know, it ends up being oftentimes working with, so in the US, you usually have a disability student services or, you know, disability resource center, whatever they want to call it. And it really is about developing a good rapport, a good relationship with them, and, you know, getting them convinced that this is something that you need someone who can adequately read. Now, if it is, you know, so here's the thing, if a lot of times, so for exams, it's a bit trickier because a lot of, in those instances, often the universities want to have some say in who does the reading. But for things other than that, usually it is up to the student to hire a reader. And if you can get a reader that works with you consistently, then in general, you know, you can work with them to bring them up to the point they need to be able to read, you know, the coursework. So, for instance, Dr. Nemeth, who developed the Nemeth Braille system, the English system for, well, the American system for Braille mathematics, you know, developed something he called Math Speak, and it was basically a set of rules that he taught all of his readers. And it was a way of systematically reading mathematical content so that the reader didn't have to understand, really didn't have to understand what it was they were reading, but they could interpret and you know, verbalize the symbols they were seeing, and it left the interpretation up to him. So he had very specific rules about, you know, how you read function names and things, because, you know, he didn't want a reader thinking something was a function name that wasn't, and trying to pronounce it incorrectly. So it is an issue that comes up. How do you best, you know, get a reader who can do that? And it often does really, for exams in particular, it does require kind of convincing the powers, you know, the people that are in charge, that it is something that is necessary to have somebody that has some background in whatever the subject area is, so that they can correctly read the content.
Evet, Habil, you have a question and your microphone is
Ben
open.
şeyi soracağım. Sesim geliyor mu? Önce onu sorayım.
Geliyor.
Ha, tamam. Şey diyeceğim. Bu 3D yazıcılar biliyorsunuz yeni gelişti. 3D yazıcılar. Peki bu profesör bunu kullanma imkanı bulabilmiş mi? Yani daha doğrusu 3D yazıcıların görme engellerin fen bilimlerinde ilerlemesinde tesiri ne olur? Sorabilir misiniz?
Okay, thank you. Habil is asking, what is the function of 3D printers on science education of blind people? It is useful or not?
Yeah, so this is a good question. So actually part of my postdoctoral research was looking at the use of 3D printers for producing tactile graphics to some extent. And, you know, so here's the thing. They have their use and they have their place. They have not yet supplanted, they have not yet replaced things like swell form paper, and it will be, I think, in my opinion, years before they do. So where there are things that really need, like, you know, so obviously for things that need three-dimensional structure, 3D printing is great. Sometimes, you know, for producing things like maps, for instance, that, you know, they work pretty well. But the reality is, for producing, you know, if you're going to make draw, for instance, a molecule in chemistry, or draw, you know, take whatever example you want, you know, it takes just as long to design that for a 3D printer, and then it takes, you know, hours for it to produce it. Whereas if you have somebody that knows how to produce tactile graphics, it can be produced much faster using swell form or you know, whatever other means of producing tactile graphics you want. So yes, it has its place, in particular for things, you know, like 3D models and things that require 3D structure really to convey. But for everyday use, it will be, I think, quite a while before they kind of replace the normal graphics. Now, what I could see happening is 3D printers being used to produce a set of graphics for, let's say, for a specific curriculum. And, you know, basically it's one set of graphics that then gets shipped around, kind of like a library lending service, to whoever is using that, you know, whatever student happens to be using that curriculum that year. So not something that's produced all, you know, multiple times, but something that's kind of done as a one time that's used by multiple people. But yeah, that's kind of where I see things at the moment.
Thank you. And I think, değil mi Gamze, we completed.
Yes, we should finish, I think. Thank you so much, Greg.
Merak ediyorum
Would
ya.
it be possible to add a, you know, sentence?
Bir dakika Can, bir tane bir soru sonra bitirelim.
Okay.
Bu fiyatları ne acaba bu Labquest'in? Onu bir sorsak aslında. Yani bu da geldi. Greg.
Amy is asking, what's the price of?
Ya evet ya.
What's the question?
Gamze sor tekrar. Gamze.
What's the price of Labquest?
Yeah. Oh, what is the price of the talking Labquest?
Yeah.
So at the moment, okay, let me, so what it sells for in the US.
Amy is asking.
Yeah, right. So what it sells for in the US is $2,195. Now,
yeah, $3,000 yani.
Yeah. Now the reason I kind of chuckled is because at the moment we independent science can only sell within the US. We have to rely on use Verniers international dealers for sales outside of the US. And so the international dealers to some extent can set their own price for it. So what it would cost in Turkey, I honestly cannot tell you for sure.
Yeah, for example, I am working at Boğaziçi University, for example. We have many, I am the director of a center in Boğaziçi University, Greg. We have also labs, chemistry labs, physics labs. If, for example, a student come to our lab.
Yeah.
How can we do? I don't know their tools are appropriate with your Labquest or not. How can I learn it? What should I do firstly to make an accessible lab for them?
So to make a lab accessible without using the talking Labquest, you're saying?
No. Maybe with talking Labquest. I don't know, but I don't know are the tools in the lab is appropriate with the talking Labquest or not. What kind of questions can I ask for that issue?
Yeah. So. You know, again, unfortunately, to some extent, it depends on the specific experiment that's being done, right? So, you know, if over a semester, let's say they're doing 10 experiments, it may be that 8 of them can be adapted to be done completely without the Labquest, and but the other 2 might need it. It really, to some extent, it really is a case-by-case basis on what the best method for adapting something is, depending upon the experiment. And there's so I mean, the easiest thing, unfortunately, the easiest thing is to reach out to us or to somebody that has experience with making lab curricula accessible and saying, okay, this is the experiment these are the experiments we're looking at. What would work or what wouldn't work? And some things, if it's just figuring out ways to do volume measurements and things like that, yeah, you can do that without a Labquest, no problem. And measuring volumes are it's a fairly, again, it doesn't matter what the lab is. There's there's kind of typical ways of doing that. But when it comes to actually collecting the data, it really depends on what the lab is. And what's funny is sometimes if you have an old analog instrument, those are the easiest things to adapt rather than electronic devices. So we were looking one time at making a physiology lab accessible and lab course accessible. And one of the experiments they had was measuring lung volume. So you blow into a device and it measures how much air you blow. And the thing that they had, the device they had, actually was literally the measurement part of it was a dial that had numbers on it with a physical arrow that moved around the dial as you breathed out. And so literally all that would need to be done to make that accessible is to put tactile markings around the dial to indicate the numbers. And then as the student, as the person breathed, you could just look to see where the arrow was. You wouldn't think that would be an easy thing to, it wouldn't have been an easy experiment to modify, but because their device was what it was actually a very easy thing to do. And so it really depends.
Okay. Can, son bir şey söyleyecektin galiba, çok kısa.
Yok, tamam, yanıtladı zaten. Ben hani Quest'le ne geliyor diye soracaktım. Söyledi.
Okay. Gamze.
Okay. Greg, again, thank you so much. It was a great session for us. And I would like to thank our audience as well for your interest and great questions. We will be waiting you all in our NFB session tomorrow evening. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Greg,
Bye-bye.
thank you very much.
Greg, thank you again. It was great.
Okay, then I am stopping the live stream. Thank you very much, Greg. Very good to see you. And everyone, we should also thank you to everyone because they wait very much. I think the time is for in Turkey 23:39. We were here from 8:30, but no one leave. Be sure. So they listened all you, Greg. So thank you very much.
I am really sorry that I messed that up.
It's okay.
It's okay, no problem. And thank you very much again, Greg. I think we will contact with you about the accessibility, for example, to make accessible, or maybe to make. I know that you are working on making the chemistry codes, Braille chemistry code, or other things. Mm-hmm. So as you said, in math accessibility, we have many problems in Braille math. Maybe you can give some ideas about where to start from the like me.
I'm happy to. I'm happy to talk